Good morning and welcome to World News here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. The leaders of Germany, France, the United Kingdom and Poland have arrived in Kyiv in a show of support for Ukraine following Friday's Victory Day parade in Moscow. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk have met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy to discuss a 30-day ceasefire proposal supported by both the U.S. and Ukraine's European allies. Now, the four leaders lit candles in Kyiv's Independence Square, the birthplace of Ukraine's Orange Revolution of 2004, accompanied by President Zelenskyy and his wife Olena Zelenska. Starmer, Macron, Merz and Tusk represent the so-called Coalition of the Willing, uniting 31 countries who have pledged to strengthen their support for Ukraine beyond the scope of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Ahead of the visit, they called on Russia to agree to a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire and warned that they will increase the economic pressure on Russia's war machine until it does so. A new package of sanctions is being discussed should Russia refuse the 30-day ceasefire deal. The U.S. Embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, has cautioned against the threat of a major airstrike on the city in the coming days.
The U.S. Embassy in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, has cautioned against the threat of a major airstrike on the city in the coming days. On its website, it wrote, "The U.S. Embassy in Kyiv has received information concerning a potentially significant air attack that may occur at any time over the next several days." The embassy also advised American citizens in Kyiv to be ready to immediately seek shelter in case of an aerial assault. The warning comes amid Russia's self-declared ceasefire from May the 8th to May the 11th, announced in connection with the Friday celebrations of Victory Day. Ukraine declined Russia's invite to the temporary 3-day ceasefire, opting instead for the US's proposal for an unconditional 30-day truce, originally put forth in March, to which Russia has repeatedly said no.
Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, said there is a good chance for a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine following talks with President Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy. After meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Merz said the ball is now in Moscow's court.
There is a chance beyond this weekend to achieve a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. Ukraine is in favor of it and agrees to it. America initiated it and proposed it. The major European states fully agreed to it. I also assume that this applies to the entire European Union and also to NATO. The ball is now entirely in Moscow's court. It is only there that the decision will be made as to whether there is a chance of facilitating a longer ceasefire in Ukraine.
To also be able to defend ourselves and to keep the deterrence and defense at the level we need only to spend much more, but also to build that defense industrial base across the Atlantic, across the whole Euro-Atlantic area, including the United States and Canada and all the European countries in NATO. It's crucial. We need to do both. I said it before. The Russians are producing in 3 months in ammunition what the whole of NATO, which is 25 times bigger than Russia in terms of the overall economy. We produce in 1 year in ammunition what they produce in 3 months. So that's not sustainable. So it is both spending and more production.
Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression. This is the name of the initiative supported by European leaders who gathered in Lviv to call for justice for the crimes committed by Russia. This tribunal will ensure that those most responsible for the aggression against Ukraine are held accountable, said Kaja Kallas, the Vice President of the European Commission.
European leaders gathered in the Ukrainian city of Lviv on Friday in a show of political support for the establishment of the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine.
And this tribunal will ensure that those most responsible for the aggression against Ukraine are held accountable.
Crime of aggression is basically defined as the initiation of a use of force when one state decides to plan and initiate an act of aggression into another country.
The tribunal will target senior political and military leaders responsible for the crime of aggression against Ukraine.
There must be accountability, especially accountability for war. Because if even one war goes unpunished. More wars will follow.
To date, another tribunal, the International Criminal Court, has issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin
for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation.
The ICC prosecutes 4 types of crimes. The crime of aggression is one of them, but unlike the remaining 3 crimes,
the crime of aggression requires that the 2 states involved, so the victim state, but also the aggressor states, have given consent to the ICC for it to exercise its jurisdiction.
And the problem with that is that the Russian Federation has never given jurisdiction generally to the ICC, and more specifically regarding the crime of aggression. The new tribunal is intended to fill that gap. According to the Ukrainian foreign minister, the long-term target would be the Troika, that is the Russian President, Prime Minister, and Minister of Foreign Affairs.
All of them are international war criminals. And actually, this tribunal is being set up to pass appropriate sentences in the future.
However, according to the Council of Europe, which is the central body under which the tribunal would be set up,
the Troika members could only be brought to trial before the special tribunal if they were no longer in power or their immunity had been waived.
Nonetheless, the Council of Europe also noted that, quote, international law is evolving and personal immunity is not a carte blanche for impunity. So far, the establishment of the tribunal is supported by approximately 40 states, and the international community is taking note of both the tribunal's backers and those withholding support.
Suspending U.S. participation in the process of establishing the tribunal is one of about a dozen important concessions that the new U.S. administration has made to Vladimir Putin. I fail to see a single concession on the part of Putin.
Radosław Sikorski added that he hopes that Donald Trump will start pressuring Putin to become more reasonable through negative incentives as well. Against this backdrop, Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced that Ukraine will host a Coalition of the Willing meeting on Saturday. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatubishchin.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met with several of his allies on the sidelines of Victory Day celebrations marking the 80th anniversary of the Red Army's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. More than 20 foreign dignitaries made an appearance in Moscow's Red Square in a show of support for Putin, who has been internationally isolated since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, one of Putin's closest allies, met with the Russian president after the parade. The two leaders praised the friendship between Russia and China and vowed to continue building an alternative global order to counter Western dominance. From Europe, only Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico took part, with the latter noting that he was prepared to drive through Europe via Belarus to get to Moscow in time for the Victory Day parade after Lithuania closed its airspace to flights carrying Fico and Vučić.
Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, who took part in the Victory Day parade in Moscow on Friday, said that he was ready to drive through Belarus just to make it in time for the event after Lithuania closed its airspace to flights carrying Fico and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić to Moscow.
Dear Mr. President, let me express my gratitude to you and your staff for your hospitality and concern for us during our visit to the Russian Federation. All the technical problems we encountered and caused by our colleagues from the European Union will be considered a child's joke. We had several ways to get to Russia, even by car through Belarus. Another alternative was through Kaliningrad. There were many possibilities, but we had a clear goal, to be in Moscow at 9 a.m., and we succeeded, which I am very happy about.
And to stay on Slovakia, well, nearly 10,000 people took to the streets of the Slovakian capital, Bratislava, in protest against the country's government, particularly against Prime Minister Robert Fico, who attended Friday's Victory Day parade in Moscow. People flocked at the capital's Freedom Square on Friday to voice their discontent with the pro-Russian, anti-EU stance of the country's prime minister. Now, it was organized by a movement called Peace for Ukraine. The demonstration united the protesters under the slogans "Slovakia is Europe" and "Enough of Fico." Fico's recent visit to Moscow and meeting with Putin drew widespread criticism both at home and abroad. He's been facing mass protests since December of last year, with Slovakians objecting to his growing fondness for Russia and crackdown policies aimed at civil society. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has commented on the participation of world leaders in the Kremlin celebrations of Victory Day on Friday. Let's listen in.
I try not to comment on the decisions and behavior of other leaders of states, especially from our community, but to my mind there is no doubt that being at the victory parade in Moscow and applauding President Putin, who talks about purging Ukraine of Nazism, brings shame to everyone who is there.
The Joint Expeditionary Force has invited Ukraine to participate in joint military drills with its member states, among them the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Sweden. The British-led force also includes other Nordic countries and the Baltic states. The primary goal of the alliance is to serve as a rapid response and expeditionary operation measure. The invitation of Ukraine had been announced by Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre at a JEF summit in the Norwegian capital of Oslo. The alliance, established in 2014, can operate as part of NATO or as a separate entity. It has ramped up its partnership following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a growing number of sabotage incidents on the Baltic Sea. Residents of Chicago expressed surprise, hope, and excitement following the election of the new pontiff, Pope Leo XIV, a 69-year-old fellow Chicago native.
Extremely happy, and the fact that he's an American descent, it just, I don't know, just brightens my world.
I was a little bit surprised, but it made me happy. It's nice to have an American pope. It's exciting for us.
First, when I saw him from the distance, he reminded me about John Paul II when he first appeared in the balcony.
He's a man of great learning, and he has tremendous experience, and he has worked with different people. And that is more important, that because our church is universal and we have a pope who can understand.
There seems to be a lot of excitement in the country. The little I've seen in the last 2-3 hours, family members are posting everything. I believe he has ties in Chiclayo, and they seem extremely proud that somebody that's nationalized as a Peruvian is representing as the Pope.
Our correspondent Sasha Farbach was at the Bishop's Palace on Franciscan Street in Krakow, the former residence of Pope John Paul II. The Polish Pope would famously address crowds from a window at the gate of the palace, and it became a cherished tradition continued by Pope Benedict XVI and Francis. People gathered outside the gates yesterday spoke warmly about the newly elected American Pope.
Now we're here in Francis Street in the heart of historic Krakow. Now just behind me, a stone's throw away, a few meters, a very important place. Now that's the head of the Bishopric of Krakow, and that's a place which has a lot of history, a lot of papal history. Now John Paul II himself from the city here, there's a window there where he addressed the crowds, especially after he became Pope. This is a place where he would address and talk to the faithful, giving them hope, sharing his thoughts, sharing his views on many, many things. It was also a place where he would return to as a pilgrimage, and it still served as a place after his death, where also pictures were shown of other popes, and where also pilgrims still to this day go. Now there's a beautiful mural there to remind people of the power and also the connectivity of John Paul II. Now, of course, now we have a new Pope, Leo XIV. Now that matters also very much here in Krakow, a very Catholic place, and it, of course, connects history with faith here in Poland. And we had a chance to speak to some residents here in the city and hear what they had to say, what their expectations are and the thoughts of the new Pope.
My first impression is that he is very friendly and upbeat, something I believe is a very good trait to have in the times we live in. Well, first impression, such a cheerful man, very open. I also think that openness comes from his experience as a missionary. He's intercultural himself.
Well, there are a lot of hopes towards him. And of course, I think that he would go in the spirit of Pope Francis.
I expect a continuation of what was there already, and maybe he'll also introduce something new, something that the Church will bring into the future.
What's the expectations? Well, the expectations would be that finally he will start to do something that not only words, but there would be also actions. It would be good that it's very good to take care of the poor.
Now, different expectations, but generally a positive view of the new American Pope. But as someone, of course, that will also have a connection here to Krakow for the faithful and to Poland. Sasha Farbach in Krakow for TVP World.
And that's all for this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Sky. Thanks for watching and stay with us for more news, features, and commentary here on TVP World.